Hi, Bill Quinn here at WHM-TV, Howard University, talking with the musical director of the Modern Jazz Quartet, John Aaron Lewis. Once again, John, hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. We were in the midst of talking about your influences during your high school days, grammar school, high school days in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yes.
And you had just finished giving me a litany of a fabulous group of musicians one wouldn't think would have been found in the late 20s, early 30s in Albuquerque. Let's go back to that and you can continue. You had just said that the Lester Young family was there. What
Right.
other notable musicians were there?
Well, the Young family lived there. Then later, another wonderful trumpet player, man, fellow who was one of the great players with the Lunsford band. I'm not trying to remember this now. I was going to tell you before. Got away. Was Eddie Tompkins, who had left the Lunsford band. And he came to Albuquerque. This is a bit later. This is already when I was going to the University of New Mexico. And I had a band there that was a nice band. Really was my band. It was a collective band, but they used my name as the leader of the band. And also I wrote the arrangements and so forth for the band. He enjoyed being there, and he played with the band and so forth. Later, he was commissioned an officer in the, I think it was in Tank Corps, and he was stationed in Leavenworth, Kansas, and was killed during maneuvers there. He was hit by a tank or something. It was very tragic. Yeah. But I had a wonderful time. Spent some wonderful days with him, both listening to him play and also talking with him. Quite wonderful person.
You had all these fabulous influences around you. Coleman Hawkins was there.
No, not Coleman Hawkins.
Coleman didn't come through?
No.
Okay. Okay, I don't know. I thought you had said that.
No,
Okay.
what I said was a man, a saxophone player who played with the Carson band, had known and had written some arrangements with Coleman Hawkins.
Okay. Right, but there were, nevertheless, any number of great musicians around you at the
Right,
time.
because I think also Roscoe Robinson had played in the Fate and Marble band. That's where he and Coleman Hawkins did both.
That was on the riverboats.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Let me ask you this. Now, you began at the University of New Mexico with all these great musicians that had given you this influence, and you started out in anthropology. But something must have happened, because now we're talking about music.
Well, even before that, the first, you know, when you go to university first, those first years are kind of exploratory, anyhow.
I know all about it.
Right, I'm sure you do. And I opted first for pre-med education. During that time, I became fascinated with anthropology, and I'll tell you why. It's because, as I told you before, Albuquerque then was kind of polyglot thing. The whole West was, as a matter of fact. And I, as you know, in the United States, discrimination and prejudice were very dominant forces in the life of the whole country. And there were so many we were so ignorant then in the country that I was curious. I really wanted to know about all this, these false facts that we were under the influence of. And that really was the principal reason for the anthropology. Also, another reason was the University of New Mexico was a wonderful place if you were interested in anthropology or archaeology, because some of the oldest still inhabited villages, cultures, are there in the United States, older than almost anything else in I guess, in both hemispheres. Because the Hopi people there, who are the Pueblo people up and down the Rio Grande Valley, have been there continuously. They can count back for 10,000 years. So this is quite something attractive to have an opportunity firsthand to know about. I just kind of took it for granted because I grew up there and my family all grew up there, so we never really thought much about it. I think more about it even now, that what wonderful opportunity I had then. When you're young and live someplace, though, you always think the fields are greener someplace else than they are in your own backyard. Right. But anyhow, that was the main reason for the anthropology. However, at the same time, I actually had a double major there. It was in music and anthropology.
Oh, you started out also in music, majoring in music?
Both. No, it's not that. It's just that I'd been with music all my life, and so I naturally had to enroll in the music department as well, and so forth. And finally really ended up in the fine arts department, though.
Right, and I guess it sort of, at some point or another, just the music superseded the anthropology. And
well, what happened to, I guess, force the decision was the Second World War. 7th of December 1941 came along, and I was taken into the Army and first sent to Salt Lake City in Quartermaster Company, which was wonderful, I have to say, wonderful experience. The people that I was associated with and so forth were wonderful, and the first sergeant was wonderful. And went to Europe with that company. Before I've got to go back from this, well, I will. And went into a special service company in Europe. I was in Europe for about 3.5 years of that 4-year war. And on returning after the war, the decision seemed to have been made. It was music that I should do, and was told so. When I came back home for a short time, went to visit my old teachers and people at the university, they suggested that I should go to New York and go to music school. So that was the reason for that. However, going back before that, another very important event took place for me on that first move from to Salt Lake City for basic training. That's when I first heard Charlie Parker on a radio broadcast with the J. McShann Band, a broadcast from the Savoy Ballroom. There it was about, it was in the afternoon, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Salt Lake City, being later time there.
About 7, I guess, 6 or 7 in New York, right.
And so that, of course, had a...
Now, was this at the point at which Parker had, according to the story, according to the almost legendary story at this point, he was trying to reach another level in the music? And had this happened yet? He describes this, of course, you know. So what did you hear?
The first time I heard one of the most perfect musicians, the most perfect musical performances I've ever heard.
Right. So I take it this is after he had, as they say, discovered bebop, and it's almost apocryphal.
I don't think that's so at all. I think some way that just started off that way. Everything I've heard of him was immediately perfect. There was no searching. See, I also grew up in the time when it was really, I guess, in effect, in a sense, true improvisation. By this, I mean, we were hunting and searching for a language, hunting and searching for ways to make things have this feeling of swing, also make melodic lines that also felt like in the influence of the blues and so forth, this kind of thing. And sometimes you would find these things and sometimes they wouldn't. And this was improvisation. With Charlie Parker, that really was not improvisation. That was, for me, instant composition. Just an incredible feat, which is becoming possible, but nobody was capable on it that I'd heard on that level before. Very few had been capable. And especially sustaining that kind of thing for a long time, because that demands enormous concentration. Demands enormous concentration to play at all. But to do what he was doing, that phenomenal type of concentration, to be able to play perfectly. It's like sitting down to write. There you have an eraser and you can change things. There's no changing when you're, and there was no, and he had nothing to change. Everything
was there,
yes,
in perfect set. Yeah.
That's right.
And now, this must have been early on, because he was still with Jay McShann. He was in New York. He was at the Savoy.
Yes.
But it was before, or I'd say possibly at the time of the Mintons and Monroe's Uptown House experiments, do you think, chronologically?
You know, that really didn't matter. What happened, the way he was playing, what you have to go back to, I guess, to try to remember, are the recordings that were made with the Jay McShann Band. Those recordings, those were the basis of all of what we do, all of what I like to do, what Milt Jackson does, wants to do, and so forth. All of us want to do. It goes that far back. It doesn't go from Minton's time.
Okay.
It goes from that time when he was playing with the McShann Band and made the recordings that they made. I think they made some in Dallas, finally made some in New York. I don't know, they may have made some in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
But those solos, and they were short solos because of the 78 format that existed, were so wonderful that from those, many, many tunes of pieces have grown from there. So he wasn't looking for himself like a lot of the rest of us do. That's a true genius phenomenon that you can't really explain with.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is very interesting because, you know, a lot of historians, as you certainly know, have put it in quite a different light. I mean, they've said that he got to New York and then one night he went out on a roof above a chili parlor somewhere on 138th Street, and it came to him. I mean, they've even got quotes to this effect, allegedly from Parker, that said, "This is when I discovered how to put it together." So what you're saying now is a revision of the history a bit, and that's good. That's interesting. So you're saying that from the time the band left Kansas City,
well, even while they were
in Kansas City, they were playing like that. Right. Yeah, that's fantastic.
He was playing like that.
Yeah, right.
Band wasn't
he
all
was playing.
That, great, but
sure.
Charlie Parker was something else.
Yeah. Well, this was before you had gotten to. You were still in the service.
Yes, that was the beginning of when I went in the service. I heard him in 1942, in July, just before I went overseas.
You were in what outfit?
First, I was in a quartermaster company, which I enjoyed and appreciate now because there was wonderful discipline in there, and also the people that I met were interesting because they were very different from the people I knew and grew up with. I didn't, let's see, what can I tell you more about? Then after that, though, they insisted, the first sergeant and so forth, insisted that I be put in this special service company. It was a 17th Special Service Company.
And I think there were some people in that company that were pretty well known later on, if I'm not mistaken.
Clark.
Right, Kenny Clark, right.
We met.
Yeah. And at that time, Kenny also was a drummer who was innovative, and of course, I guess he hit his stride.
He was the most innovative drummer I had ever heard up until that time.
Right.
When I first heard him, took me a while to recover from that. We went out to play together in the Army, you know, as one of our duties. And that was a experience. So he did none of the usual things that I was used to the drummers did. Yet, all those things that the drummers, they're, you know, functional things, were all taken care of, plus it turned into art.
Plus some more, yes. Let's see if we can be specific about that, because your recollection about that is very important. Kenny is alleged to have been the person who took the drums in the manner of Philly Joe Jones, using ride cymbals and hi-hats and whatnot, and creating a light top beat. But he also brought in the punctuations with the bass drum and the left hand, which became known as bombs, and gave him his name of Klukmop, or Kluk, shortened to Kluk.
Yes.
And was he doing that when you first met him? And what
Yes.
year was this? What year was this?
This is 1944.
44. Okay, fine. Yeah, he was doing that. Who was there? Anybody else there in the Special Services outfit that you met at that time?
Oh, you mean interesting?
Yeah, I mean musicians.
Well, no, Joe Lewis was attached to our company for a while.
Yeah,
That was very interesting.
Right.
Me, I met him, got to know him a little bit.
And you went overseas? Did you go overseas?
Yes, I spent all the time in Europe.
That was your first trip?
Yes.
Right.
I've got to go back a little bit now for you, though. While I was going to the University of New Mexico in 1940, before the war started, I was fortunate enough to have a very wonderful professor in the drama department. So I did some things over there. Oh, yes, I must remember the time. And during that time, I wrote music for a musical that they produced there in the drama department. And also met a man who, at that time, was married to the sister-in-law of John Hammond. In other words, John Hammond and David Sarvis were both married. They were married to sisters. And when John Hammond came through Albuquerque, on one of his travels, I met him then, and he asked me to send some arrangements. He was interested, I guess, in the arrangements, to Teddy Wilson, who had started a band at that time, which was working primarily down at the Cafe Society downtown, I think.
Cafe Society in New York.
Yes,
right.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And which I did. However, the war came along, and except on the way going to Europe, I had an overnight pass, and I went to visit John Hammond there in New York. It was in 1942. And after the war, when I came to New York, he was very, very instrumental in helping me. First jobs, they were there on 52nd Street, and if I needed money or needed anything, he was there available. Quite wonderful man for me. So I wanted to get that in before we got too much further down there.
Let's say, if I'm not jumping too far, this is a very interesting, you brought us right back up to New York, to 52nd Street, to the post-war era, and which saw the real flowering of what has been called the Bebop Era, and you were right smack dab in the middle of it. You, I believe, met, through Kenny, you met Dizzy Gillespie.
That's right. I met Dizzy. What happened is I was discharged in November. Well, actually, Thanksgiving. It was around Thanksgiving Day, actually, shortly thereafter. And went to New York at the end of December. Kenny, I think, was discharged in about January or February of 46.
Duration plus 6.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Kenny was an old friend of Dizzy's, and Dizzy was thinking at that time of starting a big band. Before that, I got to go back again. Well, when I came home from the Army to Albuquerque in December, Dizzy, I had taken a sextet to California, to Hollywood, to play at Billy Berg's. The people in that sextet were Milt Jackson, Ray Brown, Stan Levy, Charlie Parker, Dizzy, of course, and Al Haig. And they would broadcast almost every night. And that was the most incredible experience that I'd had up until that time. And that really kind of made me said, well, I have to find out what's going on here.
Yeah, that was legendary. Yeah,
right.
That was legendary.
So that was big influence, big.
That was Charlie Parker's first West Coast
Yes, right.
sessions, yeah.
With,
And
so I, listened to those, and then when I went to New York, then through Kenny, Dizzy decided to start a big band again. This was not the first big band he'd had. He had one before, I think, early in '45. So he started one again, and so Kenny took down some arrangements that I'd written for the band that we had in the Army. Dizzy liked their arrangements, so he hired me as an arranger for the band. I couldn't have played with them at the time, in any case, because I was waiting for my union card. You must wait 6 months in New York for a union card. And the piano player then in the band was Thelonious Monk in Dizzy's big band. It was wonderful and very exciting there. I could, at that time, play single engagements, Monday nights, Tuesday nights. And I did do some of this playing with Eddie Davis. Eddie Davis led the quartet that we played opposite Dizzy's big band down at the Spotlight. This is the club on 56th Street.
this is Eddie Lockjaw Davis?
Yes.
Yes,
That's right.
Just want to make sure.
Right. And then, at the time, I had already enrolled at the Manhattan School of Music and started school. Then July rolled around, June about, and the end of the school term came. Also, I received my card, union card. Dizzy asked me to join playing piano as well as arranging, which I did. And the first job as piano player with Dizzy's band was a recording date where we recorded, when I got the Things to Come was what we had to record. So that was really quite a big shock.
Well, those weren't dial sessions, right?
No, these were Musicraft.
Musicraft, right.
Right. And so I had planned, to stay just through the summer. But then I thought about it when September came, and I thought, I can go back to school again sometime. I can't have this experience, which is another type of school, which I want badly. So I stayed with Dizzy and stayed there.
Good choice.
Right.
Right.
Well, for me it was.
Sure.
And stayed there until 1948, and had made some wonderful friends. That's when Milt and I became very close friends.
Before we go to that, let me take you back 1 second to Billy Berg's, because that was really a pioneering event. I guess this was the first time that the West Coast had ever heard the music that we call bebop.
Yes.
And what was the reception out there at that time? What was the treatment you got?
No, I wasn't there, What I heard those broadcasts on the radio.
You weren't there. You didn't go.
No,
Yeah.
Milt was part of that section.
I know he was there.
I listened on the radio. The reception from me was phenomenal. There was nothing like that. Every record I could find that Dizzy and Charlie Parker had made, I found a way to get my hands on.
Yes, because I guess we have to ask Milt this, but it was a little rough, I think, for some of the people. It was split down the middle, kind of like much later on with the Ornette music.
Oh, no, there was an earlier split than that. There was a split between Dizzy Gillespie's way of music and the other representative, Louis Armstrong.
Right. Yeah, that went back to 1930s, 38, 39, 40, around in there.
You mean the split?
Yeah.
No, that's...
It was a little earlier?
No.
Little later, rather?
It was exactly at that time where there were people who were not appreciative at all of what Dizzy was doing, and I'll go into that in a minute. And, of course, those whose foundations were built upon Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, for me, is in fact, the true, really inventor of this music, jazz. Without Louis Armstrong, we wouldn't have the music today. We'd have very little music today, if you think about it. Because for me, all of our popular music is based upon jazz. And he made it possible that this music survived and found the true ways to make it function. And so we're all indebted, of course, to him. What, to me, the term bebop, I think, is a rather useless term. It doesn't mean anything. It was, I guess, intended to try to be useful with Dizzy as an attractive popular term to try and popularize what he was doing. Really didn't do it in the sense that it needed to do for him, because that's what he was looking for, was a parallel career to Louis Armstrong's as a trumpet player and same thing, and an entertainer, since he came from that background and so forth. And he really was looking at that. But what it was, to me, as I see now, kind of in hindsight, was the development jazz that entered virtuoso period. The virtuosity became incredible, and it still is today. Before, as I said before, in the time when it was really kind of improvisation, we were hunting, so it was a much simpler thing to do, and it was available to far more people, to amateurs and anybody trying to play. That was all over with when as a point of departure, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker showed up. It had been going anyhow with the advent of the great soloists in the Ellington band, the great soloists in the Lunsford band, the great soloists in the Basie band, and the beginning band of this, of course, the Fletcher Henderson band, because those solos also were developing virtuosity. But then virtuosity as such became the norm with Dizzy, Charlie Parker, and that time from now 1945 on. Every player had to be that the music became extremely difficult just to read and to execute, just the written part, let alone what you must improvise to even try to complement those written parts.
Sure. Well, you were at a point in New York when you got back to New York after the service that you were free to go in any direction. You stayed with Dizzy for a while.
Until I stayed with Dizzy, very wonderful events that took place between the time I joined him as piano player, and left in 1948. Were high points for me were the trip that he made to Europe in 1947, in the winter of 47. He was engaged by Swedish impresarios to make a trip, particularly to Scandinavia. We traveled to Sweden and to Denmark, mainly. And there, Dizzy had his greatest success there. They understood that it was this virtuosity and appreciated virtue. Europeans, their background is different from mass public here. And for me, I saw, well, that's what he has to do. He can't play for dances. This is really doesn't make sense with this kind of music. It's music that you have to listen to, and the excitement is this virtuosity that you see taking place. In the same sense that you go to listen to people perform Beethoven's music, and particularly Chopin's music. It's music that is not for the ordinary player at all. It's for virtuosos. And to be a virtuoso, you really have to have a set of, or a combination of factors that make this possible to do. The coordination, physical coordination has to be fantastic. Mental coordination and concentration has to be fantastic to be able to do this at all. So it's really, that's kind of the height of what you can do with Western music, is this. And that happened there. I'm fortunate to watch it happen with Dizzy Gillespie.
And since this is seminal research, who were some of the contributors to that band other than yourself and, of course, the leader?
Tad Dameron was one of the arrangers with me at the time. Another arranger was Walter Fuller, Walter Gill Fuller, to make distinction. There was another great trumpet player, Walter Fuller, who played with the Hines Band. Those were the, and we were the principal contributors. George Russell also contributed a few things, but he wasn't, well, a regular arranger. I had to write a lot of things that were popular at the time that he wanted.
Was James Moody one of the principal soloists at the time?
Yes, he was. James Moody was one of the principal soloists in the band.
And Kenny was on and off.
He was there for a short time.
Right.
But when he was there, it was something else.
Right. And who else came into that band? Art Blakey came into that band?
No, the other drummers in the band were Teddy Stewart from Kansas City and Joe Harris from Pittsburgh.
Okay. Yeah, it was a fabulous band, and sort of shared personnel. I think some of the personnel came out of Hines, Eckstein period.
Some of the trumpet players, I think a couple of those, a few of the players had played with Dizzy before, in both Hines' band and also in the band of Les Height from the coast. The baritone player, Sol Moore, had played with Dizzy there with Les Height's band.
Then you, by this
Leon Comagese, trombone player, he also.
Yeah, you had been, you had played by now with Charlie Parker, you had played with Dizzy Gillespie, you had played with Lester Young. You were...
The first recording date with Charlie Parker was also one of the high points of my life.
Talk a little about that. That was right around that period, wasn't it?
Yes, well, it was right after that, actually. I had come back from Europe in 1948. One of the most phenomenal concerts for Dizzy was in January, I guess, 1948, in Paris, in Salle Pleyel, the great concert hall there. And there he had phenomenal success with the public. But again, the big split came in those, the people who were detractors and those who were for and against. But mainly, they were awed by what happened. They had not heard anything like this because of war, and so that was fabulous. But then I came back with him, and then I'd received an offer to work as an arranger at Lido in Paris. So that was the second time I was in Paris. I was in Paris during the war, and Paris for me was the only city that I immediately just was like a romance, fell in love with, and the only city where there were no disappointments at all. Never. So this third opportunity to go back to Paris, I decided to do. So I went back and stayed a short time. In the meantime, before that, and really through Miles, I met Charlie Parker. And Miles and I were very good friends that stayed all over the years. We'd been close to each other, lived next door to each other most of the time, shared many.
You met Miles through Kenny? Or?
No, I met Miles through Dizzy.
Through Dizzy?
Yes. Right. And because Miles was a protege of Dizzy's at that time. Miles kept writing me letters asking me to come back, to New York, and let's start a group, and do something. So I had one bad experience in Paris. I went to hear the first performance of Benjamin Britten's Peter Grimes outside of England, which was being performed at the Paris Opera House. I went to this, and I had terrible experience in that I lost my hearing.
How did that happen?
It went on and off during the performance, and then finally, I think almost at the end, I don't even think I got to the end, it just went off altogether. I couldn't hear it. That panicked me. I found out later the reason was I had made 2 fast trips to between New York and Europe at the time when planes weren't that great in pressurization and so forth. And what I remember after that performance, I went home. I was staying with a private family there in Paris. And I woke up the next morning, blood was all over the pillowcase and so. So I took and called my grandmother and my uncle in New Mexico, and they said to come home. So they said. So I went back to New York, went to the doctor there through Dizzy. Dr. Dizzy got for me, and they found out what was wrong was because of this pressurization. Also, I had small tubes in the ear, so that they became infected and so forth. And then we started this thing with Miles.
Let me ask you this was not a permanent condition, obviously. I mean,
no,
yeah.
no.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Sure.
And was during that time that both the experience with Miles, with new ideas for what to do with a small group came about, but also as for practical working things, because that group was for our own pleasure, not for money or anything. But I was invited for this record date with Charlie Parker, and this was through Miles, and the most wonderful experience was being asked to play the only solo that he wanted for Parker's Mood, the blues piece. And that was a great deal because it was my first recording with a small group. I had recorded with Dizzy before, but that's in big band. It's again very different. And that drill I won't forget.
What was the we can get the dates, and I'm sure any historian can get the dates on any of these, but just for the purposes of this conversation, what was the date of the Charlie Parker session?
Those were in 1940, end of 48, beginning 49.
Right. And then in 49...
In 49,
Miles Davis, yes.
Right, but also while we were... What we did, it was a rehearsal band. We used to rehearse at a studio called Nola's. At that time, you could pay $1 an hour for rehearsal time. You never, well, that's
good
all
money.
gone.
No question.
Right, and that's what we used to do with Jerry Mulligan, Lee Konitz, Mike Zverin, trombone player, who's also
a writer.
Yeah. Right. And with Max Roach, and bass players were various. Nelson Boyd was one of the bass players, played with us. Joe Schulman, and Jerry Mulligan, and Bill Barber, John Barber, and Junior Collins, French horn.
Right.
And what that had developed from a wonderful relationship we had of talking and listening to music with Gil Evans. Gil Evans was older than us, and we all had tremendous admiration for him for the things that he'd written for the Claude Thornhill band. Not the things that he'd written of Charlie Parker's for the Claude Thornhill band, but the other things because of the wonderful voicings and sounds that he got. And we were interested in this, a way to take and add this to what had developed virtuoso in the jazz thing, to add new colors, virtuoso colors, if you like, different instruments as such. So that's kind of really, what that was about. And wonderful Miles, a job came up, he found out that Illinois Jacket was looking for a pianist at the time. And so Miles told me to take that job. It was a very well-paying job. Illinois was one of the highest paid groups at that time. And they were making money by the suitcase full. And so I took it. But the only one disappointment that happened, well, actually two disappointments happened. One was I stayed there for with Jacket for 9 months. It was a wonderful experience. J.J. Johnson was playing trombone with the group. Joe Jones was playing drums with the group. Let's see, Henry Coker later played trombone with the group. Wonderful. Well, Jackie's brother played trumpet. Joe Newman also played. So that was fine. It was wonderful. And I had lots of solo space and wrote arrangements for Jacket and so forth. And he's still one of my best friends. And also he's one of the greatest living tenor players today.
It's if I might say, it's for those who remember that group at that time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was the time when Illinois would, he was really blowing. He'd get down on his back and that kind of thing, and...
No, he never did that. He just played.
He never did that?
No.
There were times, I tell you, there were times when he did that. Yeah, yeah, I remember seeing him at the Regal Theater, and it was those tenor blowout sessions, right? And he would be wailing. I didn't know whether that was the band, because I couldn't feature you playing in that band, you know, so it's sort of another, it was a lot of showmanship at that point that I remember.
Well, it was a small band. I don't really remember that much showmanship, except Illinois could make an audience get very, very excited.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
Still can.
Yeah, do all those choruses like...
Flying Home.
Yeah, Flying Home, that's one of them.
Right.
But this was a great time for you because it was a time, the No Net was a historic
Yes, but the only trouble with, I was working for Illinois, I was working on salary. I got paid whether it worked or not. And when the first record date came up for that, he called a rehearsal, so I couldn't make the first record date of music I'd spent time working on with the rest. So that was only really disappointment. I got over it, but I felt kind of bad about not being able to play it.
But you were in the you were one of the principal arrangers of this music that has become known as the birth of the cool.
Yeah.
And that again is another piece of history.
Right. We were trying to do virtuoso things there and find new things, and a lot of new things were found by both. Miles was kind of like the philosophical leader. He was a real leader in a sense. This way, the people who provided many new things were, in particular, Jerry Mulligan and Gill somewhat, but more so with Jerry and myself writing things where the musicians would have to extend themselves in other ways that they hadn't been used to, which is the whole idea of making music progress and develop.
They said at this point there was a cleavage between the approach that Dizzy had and the approach that Miles had on the horn. And they said it was a technical, and Miles has even said so himself, that Dizzy and people like Fats Navarro had a technical facility that he didn't have. So he went for another contextual approach that was totally different. Not the high-speed, high-altitude trumpet style that was popular then. Slowed it down and affected the colors, the tones a lot more.
I think we both play very similar.
Yeah, and you fit into that group, right?
I think Miles and I both play similar in that sense. As opposed to myself and Milt Jackson, say. Milt is wonderful, you know, that kind of virtuosity. But there's another kind of virtuosity that has shown up. There are some examples of that I've mentioned later, would be the way that Miles plays, the way Monk plays. It's a musical virtuosity where it's not depend on number of notes and so on. It depends on making statements that are complete, that you can't take anything away from and you can't add anything to. They're complete in themselves. One of the first perfect solos that I heard in this sense were those, a couple of the things that Ben Webster made with the Ellington Band. I have to mention that. Oh, also, Ben Webster also went to school in Albuquerque with that cousin who was my first piano teacher. He was there for a short time as a schoolboy, And another great person who went to school in Albuquerque was the late Dr. Ralph Bunch.
Huh.
So
Didn't know that.
Albuquerque is a strange little
Well, I think,
place.
yeah, I think that historians who are hearing this tape years from now are going to have to do a little research as to why. Yeah, no, no, it's all right. I didn't even want to mention it.
Good.
But they're going to have to do a little research to find out why so many people were attracted. People who became, let's say, famous, were attracted to that area of the country at that point in time because it was a small town, as you said.
Yes, well, one of the attractions that I know of, and I'm sure of, was that at that time, early, there was no cure for tuberculosis. The only cure the doctors had were to send you to a high, dry climate, and New Mexico, particularly, was that type of climate. So we had many really great people who wouldn't have been there at all if it hadn't been for the fact that they'd contracted tuberculosis.
Yeah, and getting back to the hard and fast world that you were in by now in the New York bebop world. Now, when the no-net approach hit the scene, late 40s, 1950 or so, and then later went on with, I guess you'd say, some roots to become known as the progressive sound or the West Coast sound even. They say that all of that has come out of that period, and it was sort of a reaction by some of the players. This is what is said, and I just want you to react to it.
Yes.
Some of the players could not make this approach and went this way. However, we've seen some of the same players come out of that and go back to that virtuosity, switch from one to the other, the technical.
Like, for example,
well, for instance, Miles in some of his later work was very high speed and very up-tempo. For instance, Miles himself, the originator.
Listen, one thing, virtuosity, technical virtuosity, is always a goal and a challenge to any musician all the time. I don't think that goes away. Anything that's kind of necessary to stimulate technique anyhow. Even to play less, you need a lot of technique. Even there, to be able to have the luxury of choosing what not to play as well as what to play.
It's exactly, they say Miles played spaces as well as he played notes. Yeah. But at this point in, say, the beginning of the 50s, something else was getting ready to happen in your life that has been momentous for the entire scope of the music. You were playing with Miles's group. You were playing with Illinois Jack Cat. You had been playing with Dizzy, and now you were ready to branch out, I think.
I had also returned to play for one more glorious year with Dizzy. He started the big band up again for a year, 1950, I think. And it lasted a year, unfortunately. But quite a very interesting, wonderful year. Playing in that band were some very interesting people. J.J. played in the band. Gerald Wilson played in the band. Melva Liston played in that band. John Coltrane played in that band. Jimmy Heath played in that band. Paul Gonsalves played in that band, among others. There were others.
Sure.
But that was quite a band, and it only lasted for a year, and then he had to give it up finally.
But the rhythm section in that band was very interesting because
now the rhythm section, though, that became the Modern Jazz Quartet, that was before that. It was 1946.
Aha, okay,
section.
okay.
And that rhythm section consisted of Ray Brown, Kenny Clark, myself, that's the basic rhythm section, and Milt Jackson. The vibraharp then was listed most of the time in downbeat as the miscellaneous instrument.
Right.
But what happened in there, while the band a lot of times were resting and so forth, Dizzy had the four of us play. Just, it's kind of like back to his small group format that, with where Milt played.
Right.
So we spent a lot of time playing together. And then those are the times when we were young, we used to go out after the job when we were back in New York and not working. We'd go out to jam. They can go to Vinton's and other places. So that's the basis of later became the basis of the quartet.
Right.
Which
You said one more thing. Yeah, we're still on page 1 of this. And it's not really that, but there's a lot. Hi, this is Bill Quinn once again, talking with the music director of the fabulous Modern Jazz Quartet, Mr. John Aaron Lewis. Let's go to the subject we were about to discuss. It has to do with Gunther Schiller, who was a member of Miles Davis's Seminole Nonet, along with you.
Yes, Gunther was one of the later French horn players who played with the group. He originally was a French horn player as well as composer. He's principally now composer and conductor. He's a very old friend of mine. I met him first in 1949. He came to where I was living at the time. I was living there with my sister and my brother-in-law out in Queens, out in Jamaica. And he and his wife came through this, almost waist-high snowstorm to visit us. My sister at that time was married to Leon Bibb, who is a wonderful, wonderful singer. And Leon at that time was in the cast of Annie Get Your Gun on Broadway. And Gunther was playing in the pit orchestra at the time. And I think Leon and Gunther had become friends. And he wanted to meet me, so he and his wife came out, and we've been friends since that time. And he was very still is marvelously enthusiastic about music, all music, and particularly our American music. And he did whatever he could and made contributions, very fine contributions, to that idea of the nonet that we had with Miles. And as happens, and has happened with all of that group, with many groups, we have things in common and we develop ideas. Then the central core of each individual's idea starts to become thicker and develops apart, related but still stronger apart from the core idea. Gunther invented the term third stream music, and for him that meant combining two of the musics that he knew extremely well, especially one. He's a classical horn player, and combining that with jazz music, particularly the written part of jazz music, and making another music called third stream. Now, we have worked together, done things together, and therefore, in this big sense, I've become identified with his idea. But my idea of using the other instruments, Western instruments that have developed, which are so highly developed, is a different one altogether. What I am primarily interested in is what I love best, and what my big inspiration, which I still love, were the bands of Ellington, the accomplishments he made, the music accomplishments are just sheer wonders. Also the accomplishments of Basie's band. Those two are, I guess, my primary thing. Then, of course, the precision and wonderful music of the Lunsford band. What I would like to do, I want to hear another large-sounding group, ensemble, sound and feel like and be as exciting as the Ellington band, as the Basie band, and the large group that I think is left to do this, which is a marvelous instrument that's been developed in Western music, is the symphony orchestra. That's what I'm interested in.
You've had quite a bit of experience in symphony work, and when did it actually begin?
Oh, writing for orchestra?
Writing and conducting symphony orchestras, right?
Well, let's see. How shall I go through this? I guess the first things for orchestra really came about, I don't know why, it's kind of accidentally, through a recording for the for RCA for an album I made without the quartet, which is called European Windows, right? And however, I just considered this arranging job of my pieces for orchestra. Other people blew it up to more than that. It wasn't any more to me than that. However, we used the music with the quartet to perform, and from that it's developed into other things. Gunther also wrote music for us, and I commissioned some pieces for the quartet and orchestra from André Oder, eminent French musicologist, especially jazz, and from Werner Heide, a young German composer, and also from J.J. Johnson, and principal. Also William Smith, a fine clarinetist who plays with Dave Brubeck. He's a wonderful composer, by the way. And that. However, what I really would like to do and so forth would be to have the opportunity to work with an orchestra as closely as I've worked with a modern jazz quartet. That's kind of hard to come by. However, I must say, coming up in the near future, I have been given an opportunity, a commission to write a piece for the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra by Robert Shaw there.
We're all over the map here, but you just brought up something very interesting. There have only been 2 or 3 very prestigious fellowships ever given out in the jazz world, and 1 or 2, I think, have been 2 Guggenheims were received by Ornette Coleman. A person such as yourself, it seems to me, should have had by this time somewhere somebody should have intervened and given you the luxury of doing this kind of thing. Do you foresee that that's going to be the way that you can do it, or how?
I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. Most of the time, I haven't bothered with fellowships or grants because I've been busy all the time, and very fortunately busy, earning wonderful living as such and doing what I want to do in music. And there are a lot of other deserving people who need these grants and so forth. So that, in that sense, it hasn't bothered me. I don't know whether there's a way to do what I said that I would like to do with the orchestra. I'd like to do. It's a lot of work, but I still would like to.
A lot of work and a lot of money, right? Because you would have to house, or someone would have to house the musicians during the time that you're...
No, my idea for that would not be that. The idea would be to have the opportunity to be attached to an orchestra, which is already a permanent organization, a good orchestra. It has to be a good orchestra, and be given the job of writing music for that orchestra in the same sense that I had to write music for Dizzy's band, and in the same sense that Haydn had to write music for Esterhazy's band, which was the beginning of that wonderful instrument, the symphony orchestra.
Well, I want to just see if we can get this in very quickly. At about this point now, if you put together that kind of band, or orchestra, what shape would it take, or what elements would come out of it? I mean, are we not talking about, you're not known as a person who borrows from so-called European classical music that heavily, although a lot of people think that. What would you have, what would you do? What elements would you bring into this music?
Again, that would all depend on the people in the orchestra. I have to write music for people and faces and not for instruments as such, and whatever those abilities are, and they're all different.
Yeah, that's exactly, I guess, the Ellington Basie approach. Is that not right?
Yeah, especially Ellington.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was Harry Carney or whoever he was writing for that color. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Well, that would be very interesting. So you wouldn't pick a group of musicians to write for. You would go to the group and find out what their particular voices are
and what their particular abilities are. And use them. You learn to find out what people's weaknesses are, what their strengths are, and take advantage of those strengths.
Ultimately, really quickly, would you like to be able to select a group of musicians? I mean, if you had your ideal way, select your selection of musicians and put them together for a while, work with them, already knowing what their strengths are and weaknesses, and utilize that.
Some of that I did some years ago, only, well, I took my money and tried to support the idea of Orchestra USA. However, what I didn't do, I wasn't really responsible for it because I had no time. The quartet was working all the time. Then I hadn't time to take care of anything but the music needs for the quartet, unfortunately. I should have been busy writing music for the organization.
Well, John Lewis, you and I have a lot more talking to do. We have to wrap this portion of it up, but it's certainly been interesting, and I'm looking forward to the next segment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
This afternoon, we're talking with Dr. Billy Taylor.